Lost in the Whispering Woods. It was supposed to be a simple camping trip, just a weekend getaway with my closest friends. We eagerly packed our gear, loaded up the car, and set off for the Whispering Woods, a vast expanse of wilderness rumored to be haunted. Despite the warnings and eerie tales surrounding the forest, we were young and bold, brushing off the superstitions with laughter and bravado. As we arrived at our chosen campsite and set up our tents, the sun began its descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. The atmosphere was charged with excitement as we gathered around the crackling fire, roasting marshmallows and sharing ghost stories. Despite the encroaching darkness, we felt invincible, secure in our camaraderie and the warmth of the flames. But as the night deepened, a subtle shift occurred. Shadows seemed to stretch and contort, moving with a life of their own at the periphery of our vision. Whispers, barely audible at first, floated on the air like tendrils of mist, chilling us to the bone. We laughed nervously, attributing the eerie phenomena to the wild imagination spurred on by the ghost stories we had shared. Yet, as the hours passed, the unsettling occurrences only intensified. One by one, our flashlights flickered and died, leaving us enveloped in darkness. Strange sounds echoed through the trees, rustling leaves, snapping twigs, and distant cries that seemed to emanate from nowhere. The once comforting crackle of the fire became a mere whisper against the backdrop of an ominous silence. Morning brought little solace as we emerged from our tents to find one of them torn to shreds, its fabric shredded as if by unseen claws. Panic surged through us as we searched the surrounding woods for any sign of the culprit, but there was nothing. No footprints, no trace of an animal or intruder, only the oppressive feeling of being watched. Despite our trepidation, we resolved to continue our adventure, hoping to shake off the lingering unease by immersing ourselves in nature. We set out on a hike, following a winding trail that snaked deeper into the heart of the Whispering Woods. The trees loomed overhead, their branches intertwined like skeletal fingers, casting eerie shadows on the forest floor. With every step, the sense of foreboding grew stronger. We felt as though invisible eyes tracked our movements, and the whispers that had plagued us throughout the night seemed to follow, a constant refrain in the back of our minds. Still, we pressed on, determined to prove our resilience in the face of fear. It was then that we stumbled upon it, a clearing unlike any we had seen before. The air grew thick with an unnatural stillness, and a sense of dread settled over us like a suffocating blanket. In the center of the clearing stood a solitary tree, its gnarled branches reaching skyward in grotesque contortions. As we approached, a low moan filled the air, sending shivers down our spines. Suddenly, the tree burst into flames, the fire casting dancing shadows that seemed to mock us in their malevolence. We recoiled in horror, instinctively backing away from the inferno as if it were a living entity. With a newfound sense of urgency, we turned and fled, crashing through the underbrush in a desperate bid to escape the nightmare that had enveloped us. The woods seemed to close in around us, the path twisting and turning like a maze designed to ensnare its prey. Hours, or perhaps days, passed in a blur as we fought to navigate the labyrinthine forest. Exhaustion gnawed at our limbs, and fear threatened to consume us whole. Yet still we pressed on, driven by primal instinct to survive at any cost. And then, just when we thought we could go no further, we stumbled upon a familiar sight. The remnants of our campsite bathed in the soft glow of the morning sun. Relief flooded through us as we collapsed to the ground, our bodies bruised and battered, but miraculously alive. But even as we caught our breath and began to gather our belongings, we knew that the horrors of the Whispering Woods would never truly leave us. The forest had imprinted itself upon our souls, leaving an indelible mark that would haunt us for the rest of our days. As we made our way back to civilization, we vowed never to return to those accursed woods, to leave behind the nightmares that lurked within their depths. Yet even now, as I sit safe and sound in the comfort of my own home, I can still hear the whispers of the forest, calling out to me in the dead of night, a chilling reminder of the darkness that lurks just beyond the edge of our reality. The days following my return from the woods were a blur of sleepless nights and whispered doubts. People around me said it was stress, the product of an overworked mind seeking solace in solitude, only to be overwhelmed by its own shadows. They didn't understand. They couldn't. The eyes I had seen in the darkness weren't figments of my imagination. They were as real as the fear that now clung to me like a second skin. I tried to go back to my normal life, to forget the whispers and the figures in the fog. But every time I closed my eyes, I was back in that clearing, the fire dying, the cold seeping into my bones. I could feel their presence, hear the soft murmur of their voices, promising a fate worse than death. It was during one of those endless nights that I decided I had to go back. I had to know if it was real, if they were real. I packed my gear with trembling hands, each item a heavy reminder of that night. The tent, the sleeping bag, the flashlight that had been my only ally against the encroaching dark. They all went into the backpack with a sense of finality. I left under the cover of pre-dawn darkness, driving the winding roads that led back to the forest. The closer I got, the heavier my heart felt, as if it too remembered the terror that awaited. When I arrived, the sun was just beginning to rise, casting long shadows between the trees. I took a deep breath and stepped into the woods. The forest was as I remembered it, peaceful and serene. Birds chirped in the canopy and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves. It was hard to believe that this place could hold any malice. I found a clearing, the charred remains of my campfire still visible in the soft light of morning. I set up camp again, every action a defiance of the fear that screamed at me to turn back. I would stay the night, I decided. I would face whatever came with the darkness, and I would not run. As the day wore on, I kept busy collecting firewood and preparing my campsite. The normalcy of the tasks helped keep the edge off my anxiety. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, that familiar sense of dread returned. The forest grew quiet, too quiet, as if holding its breath. Night fell, and with it the whispers returned. They were louder now, more insistent. I could almost make out words, a language I didn't understand but felt in my very soul. I lit the fire, the flames casting a protective circle of light around me. But I knew it wouldn't be enough. It hadn't been last time. I waited, the flashlight in my hand, my eyes scanning the darkness. Time seemed to stretch, each second a lifetime of anticipation. And then they appeared. The figures from before emerging from the shadows, their forms clearer now in the firelight. They were human, or had been once. Their skin was pale, almost translucent, their eyes hollow pits of despair. They moved toward me, and I could see the pain etched into their features, the agony of an existence trapped between worlds. I stood my ground, my heart pounding in my chest. I wouldn't run, I couldn't. Not again. As they drew closer, I raised the flashlight, the beam piercing the darkness. And for a moment, just a moment, I saw them for what they truly were, lost souls, bound to the forest by some ancient curse, their humanity stripped away by time and torment. They stopped just outside the fire's reach, their eyes fixed on me. I understood. They weren't here to harm me. They were here to warn me, to save me from their fate. I felt a surge of pity for them. These remnants of life caught in an endless cycle of suffering. The night passed and the figures faded with the coming dawn. I packed up my camp and left the forest. A weight lifted from my shoulders. I never returned, but I never forgot. And sometimes, when the wind whispers through the trees, I whisper back a silent thank you to the guardians of the woods. The forest had released me, but the memories clung to me like the morning mist clings to the trees. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had left something unresolved, a piece of the puzzle that was still missing. The whispers had ceased, and the figures had vanished with the dawn, but the story was far from over. I began researching the history of the forest, digging through old newspaper archives and speaking to locals. What I found was a tapestry of tragedy and mystery. The woods had been the site of numerous disappearances over the years, hikers and campers who ventured in and never returned. Some said they were foolish, unprepared for the wilderness. Others spoke of a curse, an ancient wrong that had never been righted. The more I learned, the more I felt drawn back to the forest. There was a wrong that needed to be righted, a story that needed to be told. I packed my gear once more, this time with a sense of purpose. I wasn't just going to camp, I was going to uncover the truth. I returned to the same clearing, the scene of my terror, but now it was with a different eye. I set up my tent and prepared for the night, but I also laid out cameras and recording devices. I was going to document everything, to capture proof of the forest's secrets. As night fell, I waited. The forest was silent, expectant. Then, just as before, the whispers began. They were clearer now, almost pleading. I turned on the cameras and held my breath. The figures emerged from the shadows, their forms flickering in the dim light. I could see the sorrow in their eyes, the weight of centuries bearing down on them. They spoke, and this time I understood. They told me of a time long past, of a village that had stood where the forest now grew. They spoke of a tragedy, a fire that had consumed everything, leaving only ashes and the souls of those who perished. They were the remnants of that village, bound to the land by their untimely deaths, unable to move on. They had been reaching out, seeking someone to hear their story, to help them find peace. I listened, my heart heavy with the weight of their sorrow. I promised to tell their story, to honor their memory. As the first light of dawn broke through the darkness, the figures began to fade. But this time they smiled, a sense of peace finally upon them. The forest was quiet now, the curse lifted. I packed up my gear and left, but I kept my promise. I told their story, and I made sure they were remembered. And though I never returned to the forest, I knew it was a place of peace now, the spirits that had haunted it finally at rest. I had always thought the woods held a certain mystery, an allure that called to the adventurer in me. So when the opportunity arose to join a weekend camping trip with a group of friends, I didn't hesitate. The plan was simple. Hike into the dense forest of the Appalachian Trail, set up camp by a rumored-to-be-haunted lake, and enjoy the tranquility of nature. The first day was everything I had hoped for. The air was fresh, the scenery breathtaking, and the company enjoyable. We shared stories and laughed around the campfire, until the embers died down and the forest around us grew eerily silent. That's when things began to change. As I lay in my tent, the silence was oppressive, almost tangible. It was then that I heard it, a soft whisper, barely audible, over the rustling leaves. At first, I thought it was one of my friends, but as I listened, the voice grew clearer. It was calling my name, drawing me out. I unzipped my tent and peered into the darkness. The moon was full, casting a pale glow over the trees, but I couldn't see anyone. Compelled by a force I couldn't understand, I stepped out, following the voice as it beckoned me toward the lake. The water was still, reflecting the moon like a mirror. That's when I saw her, a figure, pale and ethereal, standing at the water's edge. Her eyes were hollow, her gaze piercing through me. She spoke of a time long past, of sorrow and betrayal that had bound her to this place. Her story was tragic, a tale of love lost and a curse that kept her wandering these woods. As she spoke, the temperature dropped and a mist began to rise from the lake, enveloping us both. I wanted to run to escape the chilling grip of her presence, but I was rooted to the spot. The mist grew thicker and her form began to fade, but her voice never wavered. It was then that I realized I was part of her story now, a living witness to her eternal sorrow. The next thing I knew, the sun was rising, and I was lying by the lake, shivering and alone. My friends found me concerned and confused by my absence. I tried to explain, but the words wouldn't come. They said there was no woman, no mist, just me, sleepwalking into the night. But I know what I saw, what I felt. And sometimes, when the night is still and the air grows cold, I hear her whisper my name, calling me back to the lake. The encounter by the lake left me with more questions than answers. My friends noticed a change in me. I was distant, preoccupied with the whispers that now filled my dreams. They spoke of hidden truths and ancient secrets, urging me to delve deeper into the forest's heart. On the second night, I found myself drawn once again to the lake. This time, the moon was shrouded by clouds, and the darkness was almost complete. I felt her presence before I saw her, the ghostly woman from the night before, her form barely visible in the gloom. She told me of a time when the forest was young and her people lived in harmony with the land. But the darkness came, a malevolent force that covered the life within the woods. Her people fought bravely, but were no match for the shadow that swept through their home, leaving only death in its wake. As the last of her kin, she made a pact with the spirits of the forest, binding her soul to the lake in exchange for the power to hold the darkness at bay. But the cost was high, and she was condemned to an eternity of solitude, her spirit anchored to the watery grave. The mist began to rise again, and I felt a chill that seemed to seep into my bones. She reached out, her hand cold and insubstantial, and when our fingers touched, visions flooded my mind. I saw the battle, the fall of her people, and the creeping shadow that threatened to consume everything. When the vision ended, I was alone once again, the cold dawn light filtering through the trees. I knew then that I couldn't leave her or the forest to the mercy of the darkness. I had to find a way to free her spirit and banish the shadow once and for all. The rest of the trip passed in a blur. I was consumed with research, poring over old texts and forgotten lore, looking for anything that might help. I learned of ancient rituals and powerful talismans, but nothing seemed certain. It wasn't until I returned to the forest, armed with knowledge and a fierce determination, that I found the answer. In the heart of the woods, where the trees grew old and the air hummed with power, I found the remains of her people's last stand. And there, among the ruins, I discovered the key to breaking the curse. As I performed the ritual, the forest came alive around me. The spirits of the trees, the water, and the air lent their strength, and together we fought back the darkness that had lingered for so long. The battle raged until the shadow was no more, and the woman's spirit was finally free. She thanked me with a smile that was both sad and beautiful, then faded into the light of the new dawn. The forest was at peace, and though I knew I would never forget her, I felt a sense of closure. I left the woods behind, but the whispers never truly ceased. They became a part of me, a reminder of the mysteries that lie just beyond the veil of our understanding. And sometimes, when the moon is full, I find myself wandering back to the lake just to remember.